What's up, everyone, and welcome into a special episode of the Buffalo Sports Collective. Today, we have the pleasure of talking with Saskatchewan Rush play-by-play broadcaster Cody Janzen. He joins us in the BSC. Cody, thanks for jumping on. How is it going?
Hey man, always a pleasure. It's going great. It's what a matchup we got this weekend. Come on, if you're a lacrosse fan, doesn't matter, Bandits, Rush, anything NLL, like this is just a super fun week. So yeah, I'm doing great.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has had this game circled on their schedule for at least a month now, if not longer than that, especially since the two teams have kind of separated themselves in the top tier of the group. But man, I told my wife who was going to be next on this series. We're trying to do something where we interview somebody upcoming on the Buffalo Bandits schedule to learn a little bit more about their opponent coming up, so everybody that can kind of get a more in-depth knowledge of that opponent rather than just me and Phil trying to talk about it. But I was like, yeah, I got Cody Janzen coming on, and she goes, Janzen? I was like, yeah, Janzen, but it's spelled different. She was S-E-N, you're Z-E-N, but yeah, she got all hyped when she heard a similar last name.
Close enough. We'll count it.
Right. But I had Cooper Perkins on last week, and we talked about the Seals, obviously, and I asked him this question, so I might make it a staple moving forward. What would be one word to describe the Saskatchewan Rush's season so far?
Gritty. Gritty is definitely. I wouldn't even hesitate to think of something else. Any team that's had, 11 different lineups is insane. And so I think just for a team that is trying to still build chemistry in a sense of, integrating Austin Shanks, Matt Hossack, and five rookies into the lineup on any given night is not an easy thing to do. I don't think many teams could overcome what Saskatchewan has, whether it's, man games lost to injury. They're almost they're top three in the league in that, and then just having different lineups. This team's been gritty, just finding different ways and having different players step up for big games.
So last year, this team finished in the pack of the 8 and 10 teams, and you had Derek Keenan come down, go back behind the bench with Jimmy Quinlan. People actually forget how rough of a second half they even had. I mean, at one point they had 5 games in 15 days. It was, I like to say, like, last year we were following them like, just wait, the Rush have so many games coming up here. It's just unfair what the schedule did. And I know one of them was due to Philly being suspended and rescheduled later on, but of their 10 losses last year, 7 came within 2 goals or less. And this year they're 9-2. They're 3-1 in those type of games, 2 or less goals decided. What do you think is the biggest factor that made that flip? Is it, the veteran savvy coach and Derek Keenan coming back behind the bench for the full season? Is it the team figuring out how to win those close games? Is it the ball bouncing back to the mean in those close games? Because it's tough to lose that many games close like that. Or is it a combo of all of it?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of both in a sense of the confidence needed to grow, and I think that there was also an angle for the Rush last year of just playing in those close games. It's felt like they were kicking themselves more times than not, right? It's not the ball bounce, and it's Vancouver coming back on you and scoring 6 in the fourth, unable to stop the bleeding. That's where I found that the biggest issues arose, and so maybe it's confidence, maybe it's that swagger. Like I feel like there's just a different vibe with this team, and they don't get frazzled when the game gets close. Like Vancouver scoring 3 on them in the fourth. If this was last year, you probably would have been like, oh boy, snowball's going down the hill. We're probably heading to overtime, right? But they were able to stop the bleeding, put the Band-Aid on it, zip it up and, close out the game. And that was just something we didn't feel last year, right?
So, not to keep looking back, but I think it's important to look back on some things, considering I think that's helped the team get to where they are now. The Mark Matthews trade from 2 off seasons ago. Zach Mans, Adam J, and a one that ended up becoming Levi Anderson. I think making a franchise-altering trade like that can either make or break a franchise. And I think for so many people, and I'm guilty of this as anybody else, immediately want to try and say who won or lost that trade, but kind of talk about the main piece in that trade in Zach Mans coming over, who has not only thrived on the field, but has had to handle that added pressure of being the guy that comes over for one of the best players to ever wear a Rush uniform, Mark Matthews, going out the door.
Man, imagine just taking over for Mark Matthews in
Right.
Saskatchewan. Like, that's bigger shoes than almost anyone in the league, like it's whoever's going to have to take over for Dane Smith is probably next in line for that, right? There's not a lot of other players who have had as big of an impact than Matthews had in Saskatchewan, but there's always a time to move on, and you can either be the Pittsburgh Penguins of the lacrosse world and hold on to your stars for too long and ruin your organization, or you can make those tough decisions like Derek Keenan did. I mean, end of the day, he is why the franchise is here. He made those tough decisions. He let guys like Matt Beers, Kyle Rubish, Chris Corbeil, Ryan Dilks, Matthews, like there comes a point in time when you do have to move on from certain players. And I think he has made the right decision with, pretty much all of them. I don't look back at any and be like, wow, that was an absolute miss. No, he's really hit on more than he's missed on. And I think that's the big thing is when you're trading a guy like Mark Matthews, you bring in a Zach Mans who has filled those offensive shoes to a T, as good as anyone could have for Mark Matthews. You bring in Adam Jay, who has been their third best righty defenseman this year. He was probably their second best righty D-man last year behind Mike Messenger. Now he's behind Hossack and Messenger and just plays an awesome depth role. Like he's pissing off opponents so much. You got Kurt Malowski going in the media complaining about him after the game, right? Like, when you've got someone like that who's making that big of an impact and just living rent free in between ears, I think that means you're a solid defenseman. And then Levi Anderson, who it's his rookie year. I think there's been ups and downs. You see a lot of the bright spot. We saw the swim move. We saw his rocket of a shot against Calgary. There's going to be some real bright moments ahead of in his future. It's just going to come down to, finding that spot. It's tough for him to earn a spot over Clark Walter, who's been playing so good. Like Walter had 6 points against Vancouver. He's got 5 goals in his last 2 games, and he's not an offensive forward. He's not there to provide offense. He's there to open up space for Keenan and Mans, and this guy's just putting the ball in the back of the net. So how do you take him out of the lineup? I don't know. Levi's going to get his time, though. That guy can play. He's got the size. He's got the speed. He's got the skill. It's everything you want in a pro athlete.
Yeah, speaking to Keenan kind of making those moves, I flashback to the Bill Belichick mantra is I'd rather get rid of a guy a year too early than a year too late. And I personally, I think it has, minus the shoulder injury that kind of cost Mark Matthews the whole season this year, I think it's worked out for both sides. And you got a young stud in Zach Mans. You already went over Anderson and Jay, but I think Mans has handled that completely perfect. I don't know if there could have been a different person that comes in and kind of filled those shoes for him.
But, yeah, and I think there's a hidden part that too of Zach Mans living in market, right? Like, for a guy to fully commit to Saskatchewan, be a part of the community, really just absorb everything there is about living on the prairies. And he's been so good, whether it's, going to visit local schools, community visits, growing the game here. I think, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who does more in Saskatchewan for the game of lacrosse than Zach Mans.
Yeah, and that's another way to grow it off the field rather than just on it. But the team has been great when it comes to drafting and developing. And sure, there's some picks that don't work. That happens with everyone and every team out there. But we already mentioned a guy like Anderson. But you got Bobby Kidd in the late second in 2020, Walter in the third that same year. You got Jake Boudreau and Ryan Barnable, back-to-back picks in 2021, Thomas Kaisak in the second in 2023. And even in this past year, you got a guy that took the league by storm in Jake Nasso in the third round. Speak to how important it is not just to draft the right player, but to be able to develop them and have them take over those key roles that have made this team sit 9-2 right now. I think this team not only drafts as good as anybody else in the league, but also develops those draft picks into the players they become.
Yeah, and that's on the staff, right? That's guys like Derek, Jimmy, Jeremy, Evan, all doing their job on the floor from the get-go, whether it's pre-camp leading up, making sure guys know what to expect, making sure they're working with them, providing proper film, setting the expectations. I think they do as good of a job as anyone in that category. And then from a drafting perspective, it does come down to having a pulse on guys, whether it's Jimmy Quinlan. I see how many phone calls that guy makes. Like when, talk about doing reference checks, like what him, there's a Greg out in Ontario, Darren Fridge out in BC. Like, I think the scouts are doing a really good job when it comes down to really finding out what's going to make a good lacrosse player. It's knowing where these guys are in their life, whether that's school, whether that's job, whether that's girlfriend. Like, because at the end of the day, in Saskatchewan, it's different than anywhere else. We don't have the advantages that Vancouver, Toronto area players and teams do because travel here, not easy, right? There's a lot of things that aren't easy about Saskatchewan, but it makes us who we are. And so if if you're going to go and draft someone whose girlfriend lives in Florida and they're going to go take a grad year down in Texas, it's just not going to work out. Or if you've got someone who's got zero interest in hopping on a plane every weekend, they'd rather play closer to home, they'd rather drive, bus, whatever it is, you can't draft them. And you can't force them to either. It's the NLL, right? There's going to be guys who are going to throw a fit, cry, complain, do whatever just to not be drafted by Saskatchewan. But that's where you got to do your job and do it good to draft those guys and keep them around, right? Keeping around first round D-men like Garland, McClellan, Boudreau, Barnable. You keep around that plethora of talent, that means you're doing your job.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the average fan of the NLL understands just how much other work goes in behind the scenes. You just mentioned it, all the phone calls you have to make to not just draft. There might be somebody that they have higher on their board, but simply can't take him because he might not want to stay in Saskatchewan. So I think that's an important detail that you just laid out there, that all the other behind the scenes stuff that goes on leading up to draft day of, again, drafting the right player that fits that system perfectly, that's not going to say hold out or just flat out refuse to go play for the Rush.
Exactly.
Now the team has made a ton of nice moves leading up to this season to change what the look of this offense looks like. I mean, draft day, they made the trade to bring in Brock Haley for a 1 and a 2. Austin Shanks comes over from free agency in Halifax. Those pieces added to an already stacked offense that would featured Robert Church. Ryan Keenan's come on late after a bit of a rough start to the season, I would say. You got Mans, you got Big Mike Triolo, even you mentioned Walter. But this team's fifth in the league in scoring right now. What makes this offense just so dangerous to be able to defend in this league?
Okay, I can't believe we just talked about drafting, and I know they didn't draft Brock Haley, but that was a draft day thing. Like, how crazy has that kid been? Like, he could be the third best forward on Vancouver. You know that. We saw the game. This guy is so damn good. And they just basically said, like, we don't want you. See ya.
Right.
They had zero interest in keeping him. That was crazy to me. So, yeah, he's been awesome. Austin Shanks is just that veteran presence. I think that there is a lot of reason as to why this group does good, but I think it just becomes they've got that same drive. There's no one holding the unit back. I think guys understand that. I don't think there's a single player on this team that's scared to go to the middle. I don't think there's a single player on this team that's scared to shoot the ball or doesn't trust their teammates shooting the ball. Like, they're all in sync in having that right mindset. It's not so much like running the same plays because the lineups have been so different. You're getting passes from different players. You're running different things almost every week. But when it comes down to the intangibles that are, they're not negotiable, I think every single player on this forward unit has it. And that's when you see, hey, if Robert Church ain't hitting his spots, Austin Shanks grabbing the rock. Brock Dodds has the green light to shoot it. Mike Triolo can take over a game. Same thing with the lefties. Ryan Keenan had 5 points in his first 4 games. Doesn't matter because Zach Mans will pick up the slack. Levi Anderson, Clark Walter can come in and do a job. And then all of a sudden Keenan takes over when someone like Zach Mans has a couple of down games. Like, I really don't think it's like, oh, it's their chemistry, it's that much better or anything. I just think that they're all on the same page and they work their ass off.
Yeah, I mean, when you are that deep where anybody can have a unbelievable 6 or 7 point night, that makes your offense so lethal because you don't know truly where that offense is going to come from or who's going to have that explosion of a night.
It's why the Bandits are so damn
Right.
good, right? Like, you know it better than anyone. I don't have to explain it to your audience. Like, Kyle Buchanan can just go and pop off for a hat trick, score clutch goals. Fraser, Nanakoke, Smith, Byrne, Kluche. Like, that's why the Bandits are good. I'm not to say that there's not other parts, but just their offense is so dynamic because you can't just cover one guy and say, yeah, we're going to shut this guy down. There goes their offense. No, you're kidding yourself if you think you're going to do that.
Yeah, it's just all about keeping those pieces together, and we'll see moving forward if the Rush are able to do similar to what the Buffalo Bandits have done, where it's being able to keep this core together somehow. That I think Del Bianco tweeted out. He goes, less impressive of the title runs. It's more impressive that you're able to keep all these guys under one roof the entire dynasty that they're forming.
I don't know, where do you fall on that though? Like I think that teams like Buffalo, they do stuff the right way. That they treat their guys good. Like you don't hear about players being like, "Oh, I was owed money. They didn't give me my receipts. Oh, they wouldn't cover my extra night at the hotel." You don't hear about that stuff from Buffalo. The guys get treated good. I truly believe that they take care of their players. I think the fans are second to none. I don't know. I'm not as shocked as someone like Delbs, and I know Delbs' situation's obviously a little bit different when you've got NHL-owned teams. It can go one of two ways, and I think everyone knows which way his situation's gone. But from a Buffalo perspective, even if another team's offering, someone 5, 10, 20 grand under the table, is that going to get them to leave to go to a situation where A, they have no chance at winning a title, B, you got to jump on a plane for an extra 12 hours a weekend, or C, you just run the risk of going somewhere you don't fit in, and now you hate it there, and you're locked into this contract because you thought that extra, bit of change was going to change your life. So I'm really not that shocked. I truly believe if you treat guys good, they'll stick around. That's what Saskatchewan did and still does. That's not it did as they don't do it anymore. It's what Saskatchewan does. It's why guys like Robert Church, Matt Hossack, Ryan Keenan, Frank Chiliano are sticking around when they can go get paid more other places. Come on, let's be real.
So you mentioned Matt Hossack there, and I think the biggest move that helped this team get to where they currently are happened due to a team folding. Now, Matt Hossack comes over in the dispersal draft, leads the team in block shots, causes turnovers. He's third in loose balls. Now, this might not be a fair question to even ask, but I'm going to do it anyways. Do you think he was their guy going in, or do you think they might have had somebody else on their radar because they thought either, he was going to go earlier, or there was somebody else they wanted that went earlier? Because I was completely shocked he was even there, and Calgary didn't take him at 5.
Insane. I got a lot of words that I'm not going to use on this podcast out of pure respect of how Matt Hossack dropped that far down, and maybe it was a money thing as to why a certain team passed on him. I also think, was he their guy? Absolutely. He's played in Saskatchewan. He knows they want him. I also think that, if the Rush were to move up, or, if somehow a Jonathan Donville falls to him, let's not kid ourselves. There's going to be a conversation of, who else would we have wanted? And I think that those two probably fit the bill more than anyone. But when you talk about impact players, and I'm a big Nick DeMood fan too, I think that, his job in Philly is the reason why they got out to such a hot start. But I don't think there's been anyone more impactful than Matt Hossack. And I think I know teams are kicking themselves. I've talked to guys who have now played against Matt Hossack, and they're like, what were we thinking? And that's the funny thing, to hear it from players. I won't call anyone out, but I think everyone knows which teams are kicking themselves a little bit. And seeing Matt Hossack probably be in the running for Defensive Player of the Year, if not winning the whole damn thing, yeah, that was a bit shocking.
Yeah, we did our mid-season award show figuring out who would be our top 3. He was definitely in my top 3 of Defensive Player of the Year, and I think he hasn't done anything but reassure that and probably pull even further ahead. But 2 guys I want to talk about that I don't think get enough attention, and maybe that has to do with them playing out west, where we're out east here, and unless you're a true NLL fan and not just a team-by-team type of fan, the names might not stand out. But it's Jake Boudreau and it's Mike Messenger. And Messenger, we jokingly in the offseason were like, man, that would be a great addition from Buffalo, even though we knew he was never leaving Saskatchewan. There's no way Saskatchewan is going to let him out the door. But then you got Boudreau, who another player that I had in my top 3 of Transition Player of the Year, 2 weeks ago. But both letters on their jerseys, they bring that edge with a lot of speed out the back door that makes them so dangerous in the transition game. Now, since we're going to be transitioning to Buffalo versus the Rush here in just a second, I'm going to kind of steer that conversation there. Do you think that their play in the transition game gives the Rush an edge over Buffalo in that department? Because there's one thing that Buffalo might struggle in. It's the lack of transition with Ian McKay playing pretty much out the front door the whole time now. Do you think the play of Messenger and Boudreau gives the Rush an edge over Buffalo in that area?
Yeah, I think the Rush are the fastest team in the league. I truly do, and I think that they always have the green light, which means teams have to be super responsible. And we've seen that early in games, start of third quarters, where the Rush will catch teams sleeping, being like, not forgetting how fast the Rush are. They're pro athletes. They're not just forgetting that. Oh my goodness, Jake Boudreau's on this team, but they can catch you off guard in the blink of an eye, and they fly down the floor and they capitalize. Like that's it doesn't matter if it's Boudreaux, Barnable, Messenger, Hossack, Jay's got a couple, Garland, like Bell. It's by committee, right? Like they're all their D-men, you could say, are super fast, athletic. They're built very similar. That causes issues for teams. To say Buffalo's not used to it though, I don't fully agree with that. I think that Buffalo game plans for that with a lot of teams, and Buffalo's very responsible. If you look at their lefty forwards, they are great at getting off the floor, and in reverse transition, the Bandits do that good as anyone. So I don't think that that's a direct correlation of, hey, here's where the Rush have the Bandits beat, but I do think if they're going to have success, the Rush are going to have to pot three or four in transition.
So last one before Bandits versus Rush, goalie Prison Frankie is he came out of the yard to play this year. His numbers are up there with the elite of the league. Now, I thought he's always been a great goalie. What's hampered him is the inconsistencies in net. Now, it seems like he's put it all behind him this year. And I'm wondering, do you see something that might have changed in his game? Was it just all the pieces coming together? Maybe it was a little birdie on his shoulder named Thomas Isaac that might be pushing him to be his very best after he had two stellar games. But I guess my question is, what makes Frankie, Prison Frankie, this year with all those unbelievable numbers he's putting up?
He's got the swagger. He's feeling it. He's Frank Chiliano of a goaltender's caliber. Like, I mean, he's playing. And I had this conversation on the post game show after our game in Vancouver. I had a lot of fans asking about Frank, and some people saying like he should be in goalie of the year conversation. And at first, I was like, nah, that's silly. Like he's just been really good. And then you look at the numbers and you look at what this team's done, and it's like, no, I'm the one being silly here. I think that he should be in that conversation looking at it because he has been that good. I think maybe where our judgment gets swayed is because he's had a couple of rough starts. But the interesting thing about his rough starts is he's really bounced back in games this year versus last year, where those rough starts would lead to rough second quarters and he couldn't turn around and the backup would come in and the backup couldn't save us. And like, it's just such a difference in mentality, whether it's that veteran presence, maybe it's just he's at that maturity level where guys get better. Think about Nick Rose and look at Nick Rose's numbers until he was about Frank Chiliano's age. That's when he really popped off and took off, and maybe the game slows down a little bit more for you. I think Frank Chiliano's got that mentality now where he's ring chasing. He's saying, hey, I'm going to play my best lacrosse and I want a ring. That's what he's going for. I don't think anything is going to get in that way. I'm sure he likes the competition of having Isaac to push him, but I think Frank Chiliano is chasing the ultimate goal of winning an NLL championship, and he is playing some really damn good lacrosse. I think a lot of it is the mental game.
Yeah, I think the top three right now are between him, Higgins, and Walsh out in Vancouver. And what
No,
Chiliano
Vino's
has.
in there. Come on.
Oh, he's in there. He's in there. But I'm talking about straight numbers right now.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Just
sure.
because of the last three games have kind of inflated Matt Vince right now. I have no doubt in my mind that end of the year he's going to be right up there with them. But I think right now it would be a three-headed race between those three, with Matt Vince coming in right on fourth, and he can easily pass all three of those guys in a pinch. It's going to be very interesting to see that showdown in net coming up on Saturday. But we'll flash forward to this one because I only just got a couple more for you. Bandits versus Rush on Saturday. This matchup, I mentioned it earlier on, it's circled for weeks now by a bunch of people. Last year, nearly a year ago to this day, Buffalo took the matchup in overtime, 15-14, and it was back and forth the entire game. Nobody
That was
held
that was the craziest game of the season. That was so fun.
Oh yeah, no team held more than a 1-goal lead that entire time, and in fact, it was so close that it was tied at every single goal marker from 1 all the way to 14. So, is there an area of the game that you think Saskatchewan really needs to focus on to defend that home turf? Do you think it's just that speed of the transition game? Do you think it's trying to take away a certain side of the offense? Do you think there's a way to expose Buffalo's defense now that they don't have Matt Spanger and Dylan Robinson in the lineup right now? That did hamper them a bit last game trying to figure out their back end. But do you see an area of Saskatchewan's game that if they focus on it, they could really push Buffalo to the limit here?
We've kind of touched on a few. I do think the transition game's a big one. I think if the Rush can pitch in with three or four, that's going to be healthy. I think they got to start capitalizing on the power play. The power play's got to be a little bit better. And I think that teams have proven that Buffalo will get into penalty trouble, if you push them. And I think that that's fine because Buffalo's been able to make up for that. But Saskatchewan's power play has to make them pay. You're not going to beat them up physically. No one's going to beat Buffalo up physically. They're built, and I love how they're built. They're built like a championship team. They're built like Saskatchewan was from 2015 to 2018, right? No one pushes them around, and they'll punch you back in your mouth twice as hard. So I think that those are two big ones. And as much as we say that, the Bandits are as deep as they come, I really believe that if Matt Hossack can keep Josh Byrne in check and Jake Boudreau can keep Dane Smith in check, that's going to give the Rush their best chance. Like, hold them to 5 or less points, let's say 6 or less points, and I think the Rush have a chance. I think the offense can do a job. I think that some of the shooters actually enjoy shooting on Matt Vince. Like, they put up 14 on him last year. I think that that's a challenge that's accepted. But you also don't want to be in a 15-14 shootout with Buffalo. You just don't. Like, that's not a fun game to play. You want to, be in a 13-12, 12-11 type game with Buffalo, and I think that's a very winnable number. But it's going to come down to Jake Boudreau locking up Dane Smith, and it's come down to Matt Hossack locking up Josh Byrne, maybe Mike Messenger up there as well.
Yeah, we saw what happened with the Seals last weekend where they were able to lock up Dane Smith and Josh Byrne as much as they could, and it comes down to a one-goal game. And if Zach Courier's in the lineup, if Ryan Benesh is in the lineup, we could have a different result. And it looks
How do you feel about that, though? I haven't listened to your latest pod, but, I'm watching the game back, and I'm like, geez, if San Diego's got Courier, Baptiste, Benesh, Rubish was out, right?
Yep.
Yeah, if they've got a healthy lineup, how good are the Seals? And I scratch my head all the time because I think on paper they've got a really damn good team. And then seeing them in person, I feel like they've got some flaws, maybe not so much on the floor, but I don't know. There's some good teams in this league. It's fun.
Oh, yeah. There's 9 teams in this league that are either 5 or 6 wins right now. It's just, we joked on it that the episode that dropped today, you could close your eyes and throw a dart and you probably hit somebody that's got 5 or 6 teams. But it's unified standings for one of the best decisions the league has ever done. And we'll look back at the Seals, the Rush and the Bandits right now. Now, it might only be March 1st when the game's taking place, but there's such playoff implications on this one because this is their only matchup. Head-to-head tiebreaker might come into effect if these two teams are 1 and 2 seeds, and whoever has that tiebreaker, you might be hosting 2 NLL Finals games at home. So without asking you a specific prediction of what the score is going to be, what do you think we're in for on Saturday? Do you think it's going to be just a back and forth game like we saw last year, or do you think it's going to be more of a defensive showdown where it's like a 10-9 game? Because it's always interesting to see two teams that face off that until the unified standings didn't really face each other very often because of the East-West matchups.
I think that there's a couple of things that you touched on that make me believe that we're probably not getting a 12-11 game. And the Rush are dealing with 4 injuries out the back gate. I know the Bandits have a few injuries out the back gate. That's huge. When you're missing some of those depth pieces, it does leave players who can get exposed, not in an awful way, but I'm just meaning 1 or 2 extra a game. That goes a long way in this sport. And so I'm thinking we're probably getting something in that 14-13 range. Again, these offenses are so good, and despite the goaltenders being good, it's probably going to be a shootout. I know Buffalo just hates Saskatchewan with all their guts. I remember interviewing some players previous years. they're still mad about 2016, and rightfully so. I would be too. If you're the Rush, you still hate Georgia for 2017. Like there's nothing wrong with that. It's pro sports. You're allowed to hate, the other team. You're allowed to have a little extra motivation in front of a certain fan base you're sick of. Like that's the best part about this game. And so I think the Bandits are always motivated when they come here. They're 3-0 at SaskTel Center. Outside of the playoffs, but 2016 Rush fans still remember that one fondly. And for Saskatchewan, I think they're looking to avenge last year's loss too. But I also think that they want to say, hey, we're not just a merchant of our schedule. Just because we're beating certain teams doesn't mean we can't compete with the Buffalo Bandits. And I think for the Rush, this is their opportunity to do so, right?
So last one for you before I let you go. And it might be a stupid question, but I've been known to do that since the Rush are 9-2. Do you think this Rush team is going to be looking to make any type of move leading up to the trade deadline in March, or do you think this is the team that's locked and loaded, ready for the playoffs?
I think that they will, be shopping around. I don't see any harm in window shopping, especially if you've still got a bunch of injuries out the back gate. You can never have enough defenders in this league because in playoffs, guys start dropping and you're going to lose a couple more. So forward depth is honestly really good with this team right now. When you look at Anderson and Zawada as kind of that 7 or 8 and 9 defense, like this team has no one on the practice roster except for Lane Rushka. So they've got room to make some moves. You can add some guys. I don't see any harm in looking. I'm not thinking you're giving up like a first or a second unless you're getting a stud. Maybe they got some term on their contract. Like, I don't think it's aggressive, like calling every GM in a panic to get someone on before March 10th. But I think you'd be crazy to just sit and be content and be like, I hope we don't get more injuries because that could really backfire for you. So, yeah, I would assume Derek Keenan and company are going to be shopping around here, in the next – well, I guess it's like 2 weeks.
Yeah, I had Cooper on last week, and he said that, Seals are probably going to be looking around, but because of the unified standings, and that's one negative that the unified standings did bring is just...
Yeah, what 5-win teams sell it, right?
Yeah. And even you're looking at Albany and Las Vegas. If they had lost last week, yeah, maybe they're sellers, but now getting that third win, are they still thinking that playoffs are possible with how close that is? But
they should be. I don't see there's no reason to punt on it. And then the NLL playoffs are the best, and it's what makes the trade deadline suck. So it's a little, backhand slapped. But if you just get into the playoffs, there's a chance. Buffalo was one shot away from not having a chance to go to the second round last year. The NLL playoffs are the absolute best and the worst. I guess depends on who you're cheering for.
Yeah, that round one is just terrifying when it's just one or done.
Yeah.
I almost want them to stay at the one and done just because of how great of a storyline that all is. But, future.
Well, I think best of 3, you almost kill off upsets.
Yep. Yeah. 100%.
Not fully, but for the large part, you're killing upsets.
Yeah. I think you kind of saw a few of them coming close last year with it was whoever faced, you saw in the best 2 or 3, you had Albany just take it to San Diego last year with, I don't think anybody saw Albany making the playoffs regardless, and then upsetting both, I believe they upset Halifax, although they were the third seed, and then they upsetted Seattle, or St. Louis, Seattle, San Diego in the second round there, but that's pretty much all I got for you. I thank you for joining us here on the BSC. If everyone should already be following you, but if they don't, let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm on socials at Janner on PXP. So if you want some Rush content, you can find me there. But hey, man, always a pleasure. Definitely love what you guys are doing with BSC. I'm a big proponent of all NLL content. Honestly, I think that the league needs more of it and more independent content creators, whether that's podcasts, journalists, show hosts, anything. I don't care. People talking about the league is good. And I think when it's people who aren't exactly associated with teams, I love it. You're allowed to shoot it a little bit more freely. And so it's awesome what you guys are doing.
I appreciate all the kind words. And hopefully we'll talk you down the road, maybe playoffs, but continued success in the broadcasting world. Well, we'll be back Friday with our normal episode to preview Bandits versus Rush, and we will talk to you all then.